Hello again guys, this is the next sports psychology screencast, and this time we're going to be discussing changing attitudes. So the end of last session that we looked at, we started to talk about this triadic model of attitude. So an attitude is formed when you have three components. You have the cognitive component, the affective component, and the behavioural component. So your attitude towards, for example, disabled athletes swimming will be created through those three things. And what we mean by that, just to recap, the cognitive element is what you actually think. Now if we want to change what you think, we need to give information about that, which I'll come on to in a minute. The affective component is regarding what you feel, so what you feel towards disabled athletes who swim, for example. And if we want to change our affective component, we need to give a positive experience or positive reinforcement in that area. And again, I'll discuss that in a minute. And you have the behavioural component, that is what you do or how you act. So the cognitive and affective components essentially knock on, and in the behavioural aspect, that is what you do. So if I do not like disabled athletes swimming, I may then take some action towards them or avoid watching them. That's what I'm doing. And if I want to change that component, you need to make a task easier or harder. And again, I'll discuss that in a minute. Now the reason this is important is because we need to know these three elements, because this triadic model of attitude is how we change an attitude. And this process is what we call cognitive dissonance. And if we want to change an attitude, we have to make two of these things, so either cognitive, affective or behavioural, two of those have to oppose each other, two of those elements. So what you think might conflict with what you feel. What you think might conflict with what you do. What you feel might conflict with what you do. So we need to make them conflict against each other to change an attitude. And how we do that is we change the thinking or perspective of one of those components. So we either change the cognitive component, the affective component, or the behavioural component. And when we do that, that creates cognitive dissonance, and that's cognitive dissonance theory. Alright, an example of this would be if you had a student who didn't like to do any exercise. Alright, his cognitive component might be that he thinks that exercise is bad for him. His affective component would be, well, he's overweight, and when he runs, he feels embarrassed when he runs because he has sweaty armpits and there's sweat dripping off him or her absolutely everywhere. He feels totally embarrassed, so he feels embarrassed. And therefore his behavioural component towards exercise would be, I'm not going to do it, or this task is really difficult because it makes me sweat and I don't enjoy it, therefore I'm not going to do it. Now we want to change that attitude, so we can do that by changing one of those three components. If we want to change his cognitive or her cognitive component, we could get perhaps a PE teacher or a role model that they respect in, and we could get them to give them some information about why exercise is good for them. So it could be, okay Johnny, exercise is good for you because it will help prevent coronary heart disease in later life, or it will increase the synovial fluid in your joints, so therefore you become more mobile, or you could end up losing some weight because the energy systems will burn fat instead of glycogen, and therefore you'll reduce your concept of obesity. So that's about cognitive, and that's how we do that. That's the easy one. Affective's a little bit more difficult. We've got to change how someone feels. So in order to change how Johnny feels, well, maybe we, after his little bit of exercise, we give him lots of praise, we give him lots of rewards, and he feels very confident about himself. Well done Johnny, you've just completed 30 metres as a sprint. Well done, have a treat. Well, not a treat maybe in this case, but have a certificate. Well done. Okay, so some sort of positive reward. Doesn't have to be extrinsic, it could be intrinsic, just saying well done. It could be, as I say, extrinsic, giving them a reward. Behavioural is more tricky still. In this, we want them to make them actually practically partake in a task again. So we have to change the task itself. So in that sense, we could make the run easier. Okay, Johnny, this time you're going to walk 30 metres. And you can do that, even if they're obese. They could do that and see some sort of success, and it might change their attitude towards it. Or if they're finding it too easy, we could make it more difficult. Okay, we're going to sprint 30 metres uphill. So I've changed the level of the task to alter the behavioural component. Okay, remember, we just need to change one of those three components to cause cognitive dissonance, because it will mean the components will conflict. Now, that's not the only way of changing an attitude. The second way of changing an attitude is through what we call persuasive communication theory. And there are 4 elements that help to change someone's attitude by persuading them. Okay? First of all, first main element is the persuader themselves. Okay? So if you want to change someone's attitude, the persuader is the person who, it needs to be a significant person who's a little bit like the cognitive component. They're going to give information to the person being persuaded to change their attitude. So it could be that you use a role model, could be a teacher. They need to have high status. The second most important thing if you want to change somebody's attitude is to make the message you are delivering very important or pertinent. Okay, so it could be, again, linking to the information thing of the other one, of the Triadic model, is give them some specific information. It could be that if you learn to swim, you will reduce your risk of coronary heart disease. So the message has to be delivered in a way that's important to the attitude you want to change. Thirdly, the situation. The situation is really important. Okay, if you put the individual with the poor attitude in a changing situation, there is a good chance you can change their attitude. For example, here's a basic example. If you have someone who doesn't like doing work in a classroom, and you put them in a group of students that also do not like doing work in a classroom and are liable to be mucking about, then chances are that individual is probably going to follow suit, social learning theory, and they're going to continue not to do work. However, if you take that individual and put them in a situation within a classroom where other people do work and they want to do work and have pushed themselves to learn, chances are good that that individual may change their attitude towards learning and therefore might wish to learn themselves. Okay, so it could be in relating to sport or PE. For someone who doesn't like exercise, if you put them into a group of people that exercise, not maybe is their life, but they like exercise, it could be you change their attitude towards exercise by involving them in that situation. And the final one is the recipient. So that's the person who has the attitude. If the recipient, or the person with the attitude, doesn't really want to change their attitude, or it's very difficult, they put up a mental block, then it's going to be much more difficult to persuade them to change their attitude. However, if they're quite open to the idea of, okay, exercise might be quite good for me, I've not really tried it too much, I've only heard what I've seen on the news or whatever, and that's where I've got my attitude from, then they might be more receptive. Alright, so the recipient really does need to want to change. That's the key point there, and they need to understand why they need to change. Alright, as per usual, make good notes, bring to lesson, and remember to watch the second screencast of this double bill for the next lesson.